So thank you for coming today. My name's Ian Spiers. I'm a terminology education specialist at SNOMED International. And I also have Kath, who's going to talk later in the presentation. She'll introduce herself. So the idea of this session is to talk about the fundamentals of SNOMED CT. And we're aware sometimes that people who come to Expo may have limited knowledge of SNOMED. So the idea behind this is to try and teach you some of the basics of SNOMED. So when you go to other sessions and they're talking about concepts or descriptions or relationships, you might be able to put that into context. So we're going to talk about why SNOMED CT, what is SNOMED CT, some of the key features, as I say, concepts, descriptions, relationships, those sort of things. We're going to talk about customizing and extending SNOMED CT. So SNOMED International release, an international release, but national countries that can then extend and have their own additions to that to meet their national requirements. So we'll touch on how that's done as well. And then Kath will talk about implementation, benefits, SNOMED International itself, and how you can learn more. So both of us are from the education part of SNOMED CT, and we have a lot of online e-learning courses, so she'll touch on that if you want to know more about SNOMED CT. So we'll start with why SNOMED CT. So you'll be aware that over a period of time, well, a long period of time, the way that clinical documentation is stored has changed quite significantly. So originally there was a lot of paper records, and now there's a lot more in open EHRs. In many systems, the data is stored. But to help with clinical practice, we need to try and use this data. So the more data we have, the more we want to use. And as medicine progresses, to be able to do things like evidence-based medicine, personalized medicine, you're going to have to be able to use that data that's been stored in records. So the three sort of key things about data, and there becoming more of it, you need to first consider, why do we collect data? So ideally data could be used to be understandable and readable. So every time you go into a system, you can have a look at what was previously put. But on top of that, you might want to use that data for many other reasons. I think my mic is a bit... Do I need to go further away? And you can hear me okay? Sorry, I'm paranoid about the distance. So clinical... I think especially for clinicians, when they're adding all this data, they actually want to start being able to use that data. It's not just about entering data, but thinking about the purpose of why you entered the data in the first place and how useful that might be. And then on the other side, there's a lot of talk about interoperability. So data needs to be shared between systems. You don't want it just in a siloed system. You want to be able to see it wherever you are to help. The journey of a patient often goes from different establishments, and you really want to be able to get that data and understand it. And the data size has increased hugely over time, so there's more and more data, and you have to think that that needs to be managed in some way. It needs to be understandable, and one of the key things is that not only humans can see that data, but also it can help automated processing, so computers can start understanding that data. So how do we meet those key issues? Well, and I'll speak more about what SNOMED CT is, but if you have a standardized clinical terminology, which enables lots of different languages as well to be used within it. Then it helps clinical data more interoperable, more meaningful, and more actionable. And over the slides, you'll see how SNOMED is not just structured, but it also gives meaning to each concept, which allows not only humans, but machines to understand it. So you'll probably be aware, and through the addresses, that SNOMED is the most comprehensive multilingual clinical healthcare terminology in the world. But the key pillars of what it needs to be able to do is, as I say, be able to enter and display information, but also support reporting and analysis, supporting sharing and communication, and also things like decision support and knowledge linkage. So there are many cases where you need data that's understood in many different systems. So an example is if you go from one country to another and you're on holiday and you have an accident and someone wants to know your medical record. I think in this future world, we expect people to be able to access your records and make decisions. You may not be able to say that, but hopefully they can pull up your records and find what drugs you're on, what's wrong with you, what's previously been wrong with you, that sort of thing. So it's not just national now, but internationally, we expect that. So data sharing is really important in that space. I think also when it comes to clinicians and stuff, they see a lot of patients, but they might start wanting to run reports saying, are my treatments working? What are the outcomes? How do I analyze that data? And SNOMED is very good at being able to be analyzed in certain ways, so you can query it in many different ways. So the structure helps in that respect. And as I say, decision support becomes more important. So the most common ones are things like allergies and such like that. But in most systems now, you'll want to do protocols or some form of decision support to help doctors have information to make decisions. And knowledge linkage becomes a lot more important in terms of linking to protocols, national formularies, guidelines. All those things are now really important for clinicians to have at hand as well, and those can be linked. So SNOMED, sometimes we have to try and understand the difference between, say, SNOMED and a classification. So ICD comes up a lot. ICD looks at disorders. SNOMED looks at disorders, clinical findings, but it also looks at procedures. It also looks at observations, so LOINC and observables. It also has body structures, organisms, substances, pharmaceutical products, so all the drug components, physical objects, so stents, implants, all those sort of things, physical forces, specimens, and more. It has 19 different hierarchies. So it's not just diagnosis, and it's not just procedures. It covers an array of things that clinicians would want to input within systems. And this is why often it's used as a really good linking terminology. So you might link your local things and map them to SNOMED, but also SNOMED maps to, and we'll show later, SNOMED maps to many other different standards as well. So it's sort of now become a key linkage terminology. But what's key about SNOMED, more than the classifications, is SNOMED's to be used at the point of care. So it has a lot of detail in, so people can state what they want to at the point of care. So this goes on to this slide, which is, it has more than 350,000 concepts, so actual terms. And that content varies in detail. So you can have some basic detail, but you can go all the way down to very specific detail. So if you're history taking, you might know less and just put the higher level terms. But as you find out more detail about the patient, you can go all the way down, and we continuously add to it. So the other thing that I would say is a real benefit to SNOMED more than anything else is that it's updated monthly. So, for example, during the COVID crisis, we could put content in that was released the next month. So we can react to situations where other terminologies or classifications sometimes can take months, well, 6 months, years to actually get in before you can use those codes. So we're very dynamic in terms of, and especially the drug element side. You get drugs coming out every week, and you don't want to wait too long before you can start prescribing those things. So that's a good example of why you need those continuous releases. So the history of SNOMED, I think sometimes people think SNOMED's quite new, but in fact, it originated from the College of American Pathologists and also the read codes in the UK, which were a terminology that was used up to maybe 2018. But then along came SNOMED, and it started as the International Health Terminology Standards Development Organization, and then changed its name to SNOMED International just because it's easier to say. But often you still may see reference to IHSDO. But I think what's key is that we learnt a lot from the original terminologies. We learnt a lot about read and what it couldn't do. And SNOMED was designed to start meeting the needs of what a terminology should do. So for example, in read codes, you would have a code that actually meant something, so that concept, that code actually had meaning in a way, where SNOMED codes are just random codes. They have no meaning to the concept. The meaning comes from the placement within the hierarchy. Why is that important? Because in read, we couldn't move a concept from one place to another because the code had dictated where that should sit, just like ICD, where in SNOMED, we can move things around because the code's not related to the hierarchy. It's the modeling that decides where the concept sits. So a fundamental difference between SNOMED and those original terminologies. And one of the key aspects from learning from past terminologies was a paper that was written by James Semino, which he outlined at the time 12 different things that need to happen for a terminology to be a good terminology. And SNOMED meets all those 12 requirements. And it, in fact, met 3 other requirements as well to do with interoperability and such like. So it was designed from past history to meet the needs of what we need. And one key thing as well is it's not just we just add things. It does take a little bit of time at times because we get expert opinion. We have terminologists that are clinicians, so they understand those aspects. But we also go out, as you'll be aware today, we've just had 3 days of business meetings, and this is the Expo, people showing their work. But we have a real collaborative community. So we have lots of working groups on different areas, and we get international opinion to make sure that the terminology is meeting the requirements. So we have people who understand things within the organization, but we also involve a lot of collaboration with a lot of other organizations to make sure that what we're developing and sometimes just improving on has that expert sort of buy-in. I think as well, we're probably one of the most transparent terminologies around. We have editorial guidance. We state exactly why we do what we do and how it's done. I think that's quite unique, that a lot of the time, if you look at things, you will not see the evidence of why they do what they do. We do that, and we provide education courses. So I teach, for example, how people author. So I teach people in other countries how to author content in SNOMED. And we all base that on the editorial guidance. So everybody understands how these things are done and why they're done. And we even have conversations about, should the editorial guide be updated? So that's dynamic as well. So it's all a community effort to make sure that what we do is good. And obviously in the background, we have automated rules and validations to make sure the quality, but collaboration is key in terms of making sure that our product is applicable to people outside. So, as I say, during this expo, there'll be certain things that people talk about. They'll mention concepts a lot, and maybe descriptions, and maybe relationships. So I just wanted to go over those three fundamental things, which sort of are the building blocks of what SNOMED is. So what's a concept? A concept is just a clinical thought. So say, for example, my bag there, I think of it in my language, but I know what that is. You think of it in your language or the way you represent it, but you're still seeing the same thing as me. But we may have different ways of saying it, but that bag is a concept. And to that concept, we add a code. So it's just a code to a concept. But then we want to give that concept meaning, so that concept has relationships to other concepts. And they each have a code. So at the moment, you can see that, and it's probably not making too much sense in terms of human readability, but you've got a code that's related to other codes. So how do we make, that's good for automation though, because I'll understand it, a computer would understand it, but how would a human understand it? Well, we then add descriptions to it. So each code has a set of descriptions. So now you can see that that concept that we're looking at in the middle has a relationship. It's a type of disorder of lung. It's a lower respiratory tract infection. It has a pathological process of infectious process, and it has a finding site of lung structure. So now you're starting to think, well, what is that concept? It's a type of this, it's a type of that, and it has these properties. It's actually an infectious disease of lung. So that's how we would describe it, with a description. And we can give synonyms, so when people are browsing these things, they can search. So they might want to search for lung infection or pulmonary infection, all these things that people might want to search on, but it would still come back to that one concept. And you can see there's one special description called an FSN that uniquely and unambiguously represents what that concept is. And it has this bracket semantic tag in it that says it's a disorder, and that just tells you which hierarchy that concept sits in. But why are those synonyms important? Well, they're important because you can decide what a user sees to describe that concept. What will be registered is generally the code and whatever description you want to associate, often the FSN and maybe the preferred term. That's what's recorded, but what people see is often just a description, and you can design which description they see for that particular concept. And you can also imagine, and I'll touch on that, those are just in English. That could be in any language. So you can put any description you want on that concept. That concept, that bag, is still that bag. No matter what country you're in, you can just describe it differently, but it would still be associated with what that concept. So, as I mentioned, we have 19 different hierarchies, But how do these concepts sit within a hierarchy? Well, the simplest way, there are two ways the relationships are represented for concepts. Firstly, we have what's called this is a relationship. So here, A is the type of B, so it's a child of B. You would say A is a child of B, and you'd say B is a parent of A. But it's just this is a relationship, what's above it. And you can also see that a child of A would also be a grandchild of B and all the way down. So I could say, give me all the concepts that are a type of B, and it would list all the things underneath. So that's really good for reporting and analysis. So we have these is-a relationships that describe what is a type of something else. That's simply what it is. This is a type of this. But also, when you look at this example, you've got fracture of femur, if we start in the bottom left-hand corner, and that's a type of fracture of lower limb, which is a type of fracture of bone. So you can imagine it goes up the hierarchy. So you start with the most granular at the bottom and you work your way up. But the other relationships we have are these attribute relationships. So you can see fracture of femur. It also has an associated morphology of fracture, which I've not shown here. But the thing that changes is the finding site. So fracture of femur has bone structure of femur. And you can see bone structure of femur sits in its own hierarchy, which is a type of structure of lower limb, which is a type of bone structure. So you've got one hierarchy and you've got another hierarchy and you're linking the two. And because that adds more logic, you can see that one's a type of another based on the logical definition of both of the hierarchies working together. So we're not just dealing with one hierarchy. That's why we have 19 hierarchies, because some of those hierarchies are just used to define what the other hierarchies are. But they all have a logical is a relationship, but we also have these attributes that tell you certain things. We don't always describe everything about a concept, but we describe what's important. So say, for example, fracture of femur, we would say it's got a morphology of fracture, and we'd say it's got a finding site. You could probably say more things about a fracture of femur, but we just use it enough to define it, to differentiate it from some other concept. And just saying it's a fracture and it's got that finding site is enough to differentiate it from any other concept. But also those attributes can be used, as you can imagine, in analysis. I could say, give me all the concepts that are a fracture, and these will come back because they have that property. So it's very powerful. The other key thing, as I mentioned before, is because you've got this as a relationship, you've got this what's called inference. So I could say, bring me back all the concepts that are a fracture of bone, fracture of lower limb will come back, fracture of femur will also come back because it's a subtype. So you can see that inference. Although we may have just one direct is-er to a parent, if you pick a grandparent and say, give me all the children and its children, it'll all come back. So that's really powerful for analysis. Where do we look at these things? Well, the best place is the browser. If I ever want to explain something to someone to do with SNOMED, I would say first, just look at the browser. And it may seem a bit scary, but we have a number of videos on how to use it. And actually, when you get to use it, you'll find it's quite a simple thing. And because you're often looking at different sections that you may have an interest in, it starts to make sense. You'll start to see terms that make sense to you, and you'll go, oh, right, so it's got pneumonia in it, it's got this in, it's got that in, and that's a subtype of this, and you start to see the hierarchy. So I'll give you an example here. This is infectious disease of lung, which we had. It's got the two parents that we said it had, and it's got 17 children. And some of those children may have further children, so you're going down the hierarchy. So we've got the up and down hierarchy. you can see that it's got a number of descriptions attached to it, so those synonyms. And it's also got the modeling, so it's got a finding site of lung structure and a pathological process, and that's enough to define the concept. So the browser has all this information by just looking, and you can search for anything. Just to say as well, and we'll come on to this, can you see all those other blue blocks? They're all different national versions of SNOMED that are on our international browser. So we have the international one, but you can go into Sweden's edition, or you can go into Uruguay's edition. So they're all the ones, and that's when you go into those editions, you'll start seeing terms that have been translated. So if that's your language, you can start reading them in your own language, and you'll start to see things that they have added, which is specific to those countries, plus the international. So they're additional to the international release. Why do we do that? Because not everything's applicable. Something that happens in Uruguay may be specific to Uruguay and not relevant to any other country. So that's why it would stay within its extension. But those that are international recognized things like, I don't know, some viral disorder, it means something to everyone. And that's why it would be in the international. But those specific to the countries would remain in the country. And you might come across the word concept model within these meetings. And it's quite easy in terms of logic in a way. So you've got those 19 hierarchies, and we've talked about them having attributes, relationships to other things. But those have to make logical sense. So here we have clinical finding has a finding site of an anatomical structure, such as fractured bone has a finding site of bone structure. So there are sort of rules that allow which domain, which of those hierarchies can have which attributes. So say, for example, there's another attribute called a procedure site that's used for procedures. So you wouldn't have a procedure site attribute used for a clinical finding. You'd have a finding site. So there's certain attributes for certain hierarchies that then make sense. There are some hierarchies that don't have any attributes at all. They're completely primitive hierarchies, and that's okay. But there are some hierarchies that we do have lots of definitions and lots of attributes. And again, you can go to the editorial guide and it will show you which hierarchies allow for which attributes. And not only does it allow for which attributes, but each attribute has a range, a set of values that can be used against it. Because you don't want, for example, a finding site, you can choose a body structure. You don't want your system to be able to go and add an organism to that, because that's not a finding site. You're expecting a body structure. So there are rules to set out what attributes you can use in the domain and also what values you can use against those attributes. And that helps with it not going haywire and you're just using anything and everything and it making no sense whatsoever. So now I just want to talk a little bit about customizing and extending SNOMED. So we talked about the principles of concepts, descriptions, relationships. As I say, that in countries, they can have their own edition. So they take the international release and they add things to it. So they can add their own concepts, they can add their own relationships, they can add their own descriptions. They can, and we'll touch on these a bit, the subsets, so reference sets, language sets, maps, they can have all those. And what makes theirs different to the international is we have within the code what's called a namespace, that bit in the red. That red bit is specific to that country or that edition, so we can tell what's international and what's from the extensions. And as you can see here, what's visible in the browser, see how many countries now have an edition, and it's increasing all the time. So what I like about SNOMED is that we have this international release, but it's so flexible in terms of what you want to do in a nation. We're not telling you what you have to do. You know best what you need within your country, and therefore you can add things, you can add concepts to it. You can even add concepts in your extension that relate to the international. If you want, you can add descriptions to the international content, but generally, you would generally be adding your own concepts, and you'd be adding your own descriptions and relationships. So the other extendable bit, so you've got your own edition, you've got your own namespace, but another really powerful thing about SNOMED is reference sets. Now, in the simplest form, reference sets get confused with subsets, and I'll explain what a subset is in a minute, and a lot of people, and then people talk about value sets as well. That's another type of subset. But reference sets, in its purest form, is just a mechanism of picking certain bits of SNOMED and putting them together in a package. And that package might be, as I say, a subset, or a priorities list, or specifying particular language preferences. So we have a language reference set, and I'll show you an example of that. So you can decide, you use reference sets to decide what descriptions they see and how they see them. Reference sets also, as I say, can be used for exchange, so packaging things up. So they're really powerful, and it's a really clever mechanism to be able to utilize SNOMED, because not everybody wants to always use the whole of SNOMED. You might want in a drop-down just certain aspects of SNOMED. So you can create a subset and say, I just want these bits. So it really helps in implementation. So I'm going to talk about a few things that use reference sets. The first is subset. So this is a simple example. I've got 3 codes there: common cold, influenza, viral tonsillitis. And generally in the reference set, they're just IDs. And you've got all that other information in a reference set, like whether it's active or not. So you could inactivate it, whether it's what module it's come from, what reference set ID. But the main thing that changes there is just the concept ID. So you've basically got a collection of those 3 things. So that's quite a simple sort of subset. And what are subsets used for? They can be used for search and entry, so restricting things, limiting what you see. They can be used for exclusion in some ways. They can be used for information modeling, and communication, so that's where value sets would come in. So you would determine what people can choose within a particular information model, and also for retrieval and analysis. So how could we do those 2 things? Well, there are 2 types of ways of creating a subset. So first is just pick concepts, I have a defined enumerated list. So in this case, we've just picked different bits from the hierarchy and say, I want a bit of that, like pick a mix, you're just choosing the things, and we would have those in a reference set. But also what's powerful, and that's how commonly reference sets are, or subsets are created. People go, right, I'll put that in, I'll put that in. But what's more powerful is in SNOMED, you can start to use a set of rules. So we have a query language, which is known as expression constraint language, ECL. And I'm just mentioning these words because the next slide, I'll simply explain what an ECL is, and you go, oh, okay. So we have these names, expression constraint language, but here's an expression constraint language, and it's quite simple. That is, give me all the subtypes of disorder of lung that have an associated morphology of edema. And you can imagine you make that as complex as you want or as simple as you want. But what that'll do is return all those concepts. So for example, if you're managing a reference set or a subset and you want that condition, but then you go, well, SNOMED, they keep updating it every month. So how do I update my list? Well, if you have a query like that, it'll automatically add all the concepts that meet that criteria. So it saves you having to go, oh, this is new, shall I put it into my reference set? It would automatically populate it because you're using a set of rules to say, all my concepts in that reference set will meet those conditions. So any new concept that has that condition will appear in the list. So it's quite powerful in some ways, because I know people spend a lot of time curating these things, and sometimes they say, they're all a similar type, and I just want to be able to say all the ones that have those properties. So you can do that within a reference set. So that's what we call intentional definition example, but it's basically using a query language to decide what components you have. So I mentioned about language reference sets. So here's an example, same concept, different countries, different descriptions. And you'll see talks, and you also see talks in the business meetings. We spend a lot of time talking about translation, because if you try and translate a word to another word, it doesn't always mean the same thing. So what we base our translations on a lot are concepts. So they look at the concept and its meaning as it sits in the hierarchy, and that's how it's translated. Rather than a textual translation, it can actually have meaning. So that helps with making sure that translations make sense, that they use the whole lot of it. They don't just try and do word for word. As you know, when sometimes you do that in apps and stuff, you come up with a completely different meaning in a different country. So you can see that each of these extensions have concepts, and they can decide what's in their language preference set. So they can describe what descriptions. They could have an English description in there, or decide not to include one. They could have, for example, we're in Belgium, you could decide to have French and a Dutch. Or you could decide that you just want the French or the Dutch. So it's quite powerful. Once you've got the translations, you can decide in your language reference set what you're going to include, what you're not going to. There might be certain terms in certain specialities you don't want in there, you know. And the last thing I want to touch on, which is simple. I'm trying to keep things simple. We've got concepts, descriptions, relationships, ways of grabbing these concepts to meet your needs, extensions, so you can do it within your own space, but also you can utilize what's there. You don't have to use everything, you can pick and choose. And one of the other things that's really powerful about SNOMED, and we have a number of demonstration tools, and if you go on the education courses, for example, Kath looks after the implementation course, and within there there's mapping, but we also have mapping tools, and you can have a go and physically do these mapping things, so you're not just learning theory. We give you tools to demonstrate how you can do these things. But with maps, you could have local maps or free text maps, and a lot of the time now with AI, a lot of the time we're talking about text generating some using text, NLP, natural language processing. But it's got to have something to match to. So a lot of the time they're taking text, but they're mapping it to SNOMED. They've got to label it somehow to actually get the structure out. So you could have text, you could have local code mapping to SNOMED. But it's not just mapping to SNOMED. You could then map SNOMED is mapped, and there's a reference on our website. We have loads of maps. Maps to Orphanet, rare diseases, MEDRA, ICD-10, GMDN, CPT, the list goes on. We collaborate with loads of people, and we do mapping to those. So if you use SNOMED within your system, but you want to output one of these, you can, because it will be mapped across. So it's a lot of international maps that we do, and we try and collaborate. So sometimes I talk about SNOMED being like an integrator now, and this is really what it's about, is the fact you can map to SNOMED and you can map from SNOMED to other things. Why do we use maps? Well, data entry, reporting and analysis, knowledge linkage, communication, migration. Maps are used for lots of things. And here's a simple map. is simply the SNOMED code and a description and the ICD-0 code and description. It can be as simple as that, but it can be complex. So when you go to ICD and they want to have rules about decisions and stuff, that can all go in the ref set. That can all, we have complex reference sets that allow those decision paths as well. So I'm going to pass over to Kath now, but hopefully you understand some of the basics and the power of SNOMED, and she'll talk about, firstly, implementation, I think.
Thanks, Ian. So I'm Kath Priest. I'm an educational product support specialist. So I work with Ian and help deliver the implementation course. So I'm going to basically give you some practical examples, I hope, of what Ian's just talked about. So Ian's given you the background of what concepts, descriptions, relationships are, and we're going to have a look at this in one of our demonstrator tools. So this is actually something you can go and have a look at and play with as well, it's available on the SNOMED implementation portal, which you will find, I'll give you the link further on in the presentation. So let's hope this works. I've got a demonstration for you. So this is our user interface demonstrator, and it's on the encounter page. So just as a patient would come and visit you, this is where you might document your information. Where those blue S's are, these are the fields where SNOMED has been implemented. So you can see that being highlighted. And when you go and have a look at this, you can see the information tab. And I don't know how clear you can see that, but Ian was talking about the expression constraint language, and you can see from this field that is actually constrained to the clinical finding hierarchy, the procedure hierarchy, the situation hierarchy, and events, anything that you might think a patient might present with when they come to see you. So this patient has come with hip pain. So we're going to pop hip pain into that sort of encounter field. So then you might then go and assess the patient. So you've assessed them, they've got hip pain, or we've actually diagnosed them with a closed fracture of the hip. So each time you can see this is searching in SNOMED, and this field is just constrained to clinical findings. So like Ian was saying, you've got that ability to be able to constrain your data entry fields. So this is just sort of demonstrating how, using that expression constraint language, all those features of SNOMED, to be able to just say, well, I won't want to put a procedure in there because that's not a diagnosis, or that's not something I'm going to be able to use. So you can use all those features of SNOMED just in that practical way. So we've now got them presented with hip pain. They have been diagnosed with a closed hip fracture. So now we think, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to treat these patients? So we might actually do procedure. So let's hope this will work. So now we're looking at a total hip replacement. So we've searched in SNOMED, and once again, that field is constrained to the procedure hierarchy. And we've worked out it's from the right hip. So we can put the laterality in there. So that we've selected right, and we know that there's a right hip of the body. So if I put something in there like appendicitis or appendicectomy, you wouldn't be able to select laterality because you only have one appendix. So there is actually a reference set that Ian was talking about that helps you constrain that field to only body structures that have two sides. So a right hip, left hip. And you can also go in there and select. You can see on that example, there is now total hip replacement of the right hip joint. So you can also select the laterality within that pre-coordinated code. And you can see there that it's grayed out the right in the laterality field. And that's because it's used those relationships and implementation logic that Ian was explaining about. So if we looked at that concept of what a total right hip replacement was, it would have a procedure site of, right hip for the body site. So that will automatically, using implementation logic, grey out that laterality field, because you won't want to be able to select total right hip and then a clinician go and be able to select left. So it's that clinical safety risk as well that you can actually put in place to make sure that people and that clinicians can put things in the right place, but also it saves them having to do it twice. That's the other thing. So I think Ian, so once all that's been entered, you can click save. And I think Ian mentioned before, like there's a typical process that we say, what are the things that you need to store about a SNOMED concept in the record? And the general thing is you want to store the concept ID, which is linked to those display terms that you've selected in your record. So as Ian was showing, you could have different display terms, what you selected, but as long as it's associated with that, those are the kind of key things that you save in that record. And that's just what that has shown there. So this is just sort of the practical implementation of all the theory that Ian has kind of gone through with you there. So now we're just going to have a look at a map. So this is our map demonstrator. Again, this is something you can go and play with and have a little look. And this looks at mainly ICD-10 maps. So again, we'll think this is the same patient. We'll put in that they've had a diagnosis of a closed fracture. So we're thinking of this as a patient problem list. You can see I've put in closed fracture of hip. That's searched that in SNOMED CT, and we've got the SNOMED CT code. And then you can see the actual ICD-10 map code as well. So this is using that map reference set that Ian described. And we said that sort of map reference sets can have those different fields and rules. So it has certain map groups or a map priority. There's a particular rule and different map advice. And this map will then give like a clinical code or somebody like that looking at an idea of what there is to look at. And this is just another example that actually SNOMED, that was a 1-to-1 map you sort of saw from one code, and this is kind of a 1-to-3 depending on the context of a patient, that these can actually change. So these rules can change. So it started off, we had the female who was 35 at the time, and it actually went to M83.89, and that was green when we first started off. But you then change the patient's age. It's looking at that patient context in that field. So the map rules will help give you that advice of what code you should actually use if it's different. So now I changed the age to 17. The suggested map target code in ICD-10 has gone to E55.0. So it kind of, those reference sets, those map reference sets, that's what that's showing you on the bottom, is how that would be released in SNOMED and how that could then be used in the background to help guide people of which codes, even based on patient context and different rules that are in there, of how that could be implemented and used. Okay, so the benefits of SNOMED CT. To be honest, Ian has basically covered a lot of that. He's stolen a lot of the things that I was going to say. We need to coordinate this better. So we've got that in general, where is SNOMED used? I mean, Ian has covered so much. It's used for data entry and integration. And as we've seen from those demonstrations, you know, it's quite a powerful thing that you can put in those different tools and how you can constrain things. And sort of obviously from any health data and analytics platforms, that's what it can be used for. And also for the clinical information sharing. It provides such a continuum, you know, continuous care for people, offering those different interoperability solutions. And I think over the past few days, we've seen how different standards are coming together to help that interoperability, like with FHIR and OpenAir, linking all these different standards together to mainly improve patient care, because that is what we're about. And I think from my perspective as a clinician coming into terminology, this was the key thing of being able to be part of a clinical terminology, that you want an evidence base. I come from a profession where the evidence base isn't great. So you're wanting to be able to get that data, get that information out, so you can build that evidence base that your profession is pretty good, actually. So it's always key to build that. And the same with like point of care analytics, you want to be able to use that clinical decision support. It's such a key thing that getting patients even in the right place, in the right clinics, you know, I've seen it used for rare disease clinics, you know, anyone who's got that condition in that record, bring them through. We don't want to miss anyone, you know, making sure that point of care for patients is there. And the same with the population analytics. So conducting any trend analysis, comparative analysis, obviously COVID is still in our minds for anything like this, that you're wanting to be able to track those patients and make sure they're getting the care that they need. And the same with sort of management analytics. And I think I sort of mentioned that before in terms of evidence-based practice. You want to be showing your patient outcomes and being able to show that your service delivery is there. And SNOMED, because it can be used in such a wide variety of domains, can help with any of those management analytics. And the same with research. I think with all the features that Ian has described with the ECL, everything like that, it can support such a variety of research and out there. So yeah, so this is where we're looking at benefits to the individuals, to our patients, that it provides that way to record things consistently. And I think Ian showing with the different translations and things like that, it can be used sort of, it removes those language barriers to be able to record that patient information. It shares the relevant information at the time that you need it as well, because it's all structured, it's there and it's clear. And then used for comprehensive analytics. So it's always real-time decision support it can be used for, and then that helps with any accurate reporting. And then I think we've covered this in terms of the benefits to the population. So any early identification of emerging health issues, and it reduces that cost and duplication, making sure that things are standardized. I mean, I don't know how many hospitals I went to where you would have an abbreviation list, depending on the hospital, of what the different things are, and you have to kind of get your head around when you see this, oh, which one was that? So anything like this, it reduces any of that. It's that standardized information that everyone will understand. And then, yeah, I think we've talked sort of about that evidence-based healthcare, the links between clinical records and clinical guidelines, enhancing the quality of care for patients, reducing the cost of testing and treatment, and raising that cost effectiveness, because you can be able to see what other people have done, and it can be shared from that point of view. Okay. So this is from... So SNOMED International encouraged a case for investment to show sort of how SNOMED's being used, and all these areas that we've covered, from like data entry, information sharing, point of care analytics, population analytics, management analytics and research. So there are 10 case studies here which go through what's been used. So you can see from this little grid, sort of the Veterans Health Administration at the time of the case studies was using SNOMED for data entry and integration, for information sharing, for point of care analytics. You can see there Kaiser Permanente was using it for everything. So this kind of just shows where SNOMED CT has been used. And you can go and visit these case studies as well, so you'll get a more in-depth picture of how they're actually using SNOMED CT for those things. Okay, I'm going to click through this one. That's my old one. So now I just want to tell you a bit about SNOMED International as the organisation itself. So SNOMED International is owned and governed by 50 member countries now, which was a great number we wanted to get to. And we're really pleased that we've now got to 50 member countries, because it started from 9. So it is just gradually grown and keeps growing. And it's a not-for-profit organisation, so looking for that global standards of health terminology. And then we've got membership fees tend to be based on a country's national wealth. So these are all the flags of our member countries, and I think Mongolia was our newest addition to the SNOMED International community. Okay, and this is our vision, which is by 2030, clinical terminologies will be used globally, which will result in better health and improved patient outcomes, supported by one language of health. And I think that's the key thing. The bit that's highlighted is for patients. This is the whole reason that we're here, is to be able to just make sure that their care is as seamless and coordinated as possible. And I just think that's the key thing of why we all end up in this environment. And Ian mentioned, this is an old one as well. I thought I'd updated this. So these are all our collaborative partnerships, which provides values for members. And I actually had a picture of the integration hub that Ian mentioned before, and this is something you can actually go and search again on the implementation portal. So you might search for something like fatigue, and it will actually tell you which of these collaborations it's part of. So is it used in maps? Is it what content is it been linked to? And it just shows the different ways SNOMED can integrate with so many different standards, and that's just such an important thing, that it's kind of like a central hub for standards that we can map and share to. Yeah, so if you go to, let me see what's next. Okay, we'll come to that. I'll tell you where you can find all these tools. There are lots to play with. So I've got the membership benefits. So SNOMED is free to use for members, and its related products. As a member, you will always have a General Assembly member that represents your country as part of the General Assembly. And then there are lots of other advisory groups as well that you can participate in. And Ian's gone through how the principles of creating those national extensions and translations as well. And access to global community of member countries. We also provide a free new member induction, so that's where staff from SNOMED International will go through the key things of SNOMED and how things are going. What information you might need about implementation, does a lot of onboarding information about what SNOMED is, the different options that you've got. And then mine and Ian's sort of key things of is our member country's education benefits. So these are the things where every member country gets access to free courses. And we have 2 certifications, which are in the authoring courses. And as members, you get a discount of that of 50%. And now you get 3 certification enrollments per year, which has just changed from this week. So that's great. So how do you learn more? So you can go to the SNOMED International website, where we've got lots of information there. But we've got our SNOMED CT e-learning courses. So generally, we've got the foundation course, which everyone tends to do, and that is free to everybody, so non-members and members. And it's a real introductory course, maybe around 7 hours of learning that covers 3 modules. And that's a prerequisite to our more advanced courses. So the implementation course, the authoring level 1 and authoring level 2 courses. So the implementation course it's actually 17 modules, and it covers different topics. So if you just want to learn about maps, you can just go in and learn about maps. Or if you wanted to go in and learn about information models or data exchange, you can just go in, and each of those modules does tend to have a tool that you can go and practice those skills in, like Ian mentioned. Authoring level 1 teaches you basics of SNOMED CT authoring and prepares you for the authoring level 1 certification exam. And authoring level 2 is much more advanced authoring skills. And that prepares you for the level 2 certification there. We do have some learning pathways which don't have any assessments or anything like that you can just go in and have a look at. So there's one for developers, data analysts, clinicians, and a translators one as well. The clinicians one is just a few videos, because we know clinicians are often busy and we just want them to be able to get an understanding of SNOMED. So there's a few videos that they can just go in, and it gives a basic understanding. And the translators learning pathway was developed for those translators who perhaps don't have time to sit the foundation course but need a general understanding and what translators might need to be able to do to translate SNOMED CT. Okay, the implementation support portal. This is a key thing, I would think, if you're interested in anything to do with implementation, is to go here. You will find lots of information about getting started with implementations, but you'll also find, if you look at the top, there's a bit I think it's called showcases. I don't think we can see it on this bit here. And you'll find some demonstrators, and that is where you will find a big list of tools for you to go in and play and test these principles of SNOMED CT that you've learned in the courses or through any of the sessions you might go to. It's also got tools for sort of implementation maturity assessments, and there's a new framework that's come out with that as well. There's also the SNOMED CT document library, which is just new. We've just migrated to a new document library, which is now really great and searchable. And that's where you'll find a lot of the information, like the editorial guide Ian spoke about that the authors use to create SNOMED CT. It's got a lot of implementation guides as well on specific topics, like if you're wanting to implement something on allergies or anything like that, it has those key topics for you to go through. Okay, so how else do you get involved in the SNOMED community? We're always welcoming anybody, please. You know, we need as much information, like if you're a clinician, we've got clinical reference groups. You know, we need to know what's going on the ground in SNOMED and how things are working and what we can do to help. So the clinical reference groups tend to be based on particular, you know, clinical domains. I think there's sort of mental health, nursing, pathology, those kind of things where clinicians from all around the world get together and talk about what content should be in SNOMED CT. We've got the vendor marketplace for vendors as well. You can get involved sort of locally, so that's like through your member country, through your NRC, things like that. Link with your local SNOMED community as well. We've also got some new SNOMED forums, that was also on my list, that you can just go in, have a look and look at the different topics and see what discussions are going on around SNOMED CT content and implementation. Attending an event, well, everyone's here, so that's great to see you all at our Expo, and we do run these quite a lot in our business meetings, so yeah, that's always a good way to get involved. Then we have some webinars as well. So some of those are clinical focused, and we'll look at sort of the clinical engagement side of things, where clinicians who are working with SNOMED CT come and present their work. There are also research webinar streams, which is the same, where people at the high level of sort of research come and let us know how things are going in terms of SNOMED and research. And then there's an implementation web series where we get implementers again, you know, to come and show how they're using SNOMED CT. And sometimes it's not always good, sometimes it's bad, you know, it's how we can problem solve and improve the implementation of SNOMED in the community. And as well as sort of our business meetings and Expo that happen, so the Expo happens once a year and our business meetings happen twice a year in April and October. There are also meetings for all the other advisory groups, like we have an education e-learning advisory group that tends to just meet twice a year, but others meet on a regular basis. So the what's on this week calendar will always tell you where those meetings are. Okay, thank you everyone for your time. So thank you for listening and for this introduction of SNOMED. If you've got any questions, please let us know, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the Expo and any sessions that you might be attending. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions they want to ask at all? I'll bring the mic.
See if there's any online.
Good morning. Good morning. Mm-hmm. Just a quick question. You said it's a monthly release,
yeah.
A monthly update. Is that a recent change? I thought it was biannually, 6 monthly.
It's in the last, it's probably moved down about 2 years. Say it again?
Yeah.
Probably 2 years ago, SNOMED International did that. Whether the national ones are doing monthly releases, often they'll still be 6 monthly, but nationally, we're doing that. Some of them are trying to move to monthly. As I say, in drugs, if they use SNOMED, sometimes they have sort of a separate product, a data dictionary that moves quicker than maybe their, the clinical aspects of things. But yeah, International moved monthly I think about 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're free to go.
Thank you for coming. And if you want to chat to either of us, by all means do. We're SNOMED Education. We want to teach you SNOMED in whatever shape or form you want, so please do chat to us.